Sounds like
All right. Good afternoon and welcome everyone. If you see us chuckle, we enjoyed the countdown a little bit. So that was a nice experience here from the technology. But anyway, I'm very excited about the panel webinar we got lined up today. It's another episode of our Thought Leadership series on innovation at scale. Personally, what I sometimes say that often the best way to learn is to make yourself the dumbest person in the room. And oh boy, have I succeeded today, right? So I'm definitely that. So extremely honored by the presence of the guests today. We are expecting one more, so I hope he'll join us during the session. I'll shortly introduce our guests. From my side, my name is Davy. I'm responsible here at Wazoku for helping our customers to deliver solutions for innovation at scale. For once, I won't do a company pitch. I won't do a solution pitch. I do that all day long together with the team. So, of course, if you want one, I'm happy to deliver one. So feel free to reach out to me directly or let us know through the website. And we'll for sure get you one. Now, before we dive in, a couple of housekeeping elements, not too many. Of course, as you can imagine, this webinar is being recorded. So if you want to review it at a later stage, we can make that happen. You'll get the recording sent to you through email. And then throughout the conversation, please ask any questions. You can put them in the chat through the Get Questions interface. We'll review them and we'll try to address as many as possible. Can't promise we'll be able to address them all, but we'll definitely keep a close eye on them. All right. I know last week, I believe we already had a great conversation with Andrew, who's joining us today as well, and Professor Michael Tushman from Harvard Business School on how to lead change for innovation at scale. Today, we would like to dig a little deeper into that topic, specifically on the scaling and the culture aspects, right? And on this exciting topic, I'm joined by the guests today. Firstly, Rick Webb, who's a former SVP of Innovation at Walmart, currently angel investor and startup advisor. We'll hope that Isaac can join us, and when he comes, I'll introduce him in due time. And then also Professor Charles O'Reilly, author and professor at Stanford Graduate School of Business, and co-author of the Winning Through Innovation book and Lead and Disrupt, which I actually have here. I have my copy. A must-read book here at Wazoku. We have the team all have read through it. And I'll also explain later how you can claim your copy with us. So more on that to come. And then Andy Vince, director and co-founder of Change Logic, who we recently inked a partnership with, and also co-author of the upcoming book, Corporate Explorers, which I believe is going to come out in February. And so we all look forward to that and reading that very soon. And we may touch on some of the subjects as we go on. All right.
Hey, Davy. People are saying they're getting a lot of echo, so I think maybe we speakers, if we'll go on mute when we're not speaking, just see if we can reduce that a little bit.
Sounds good. All right. I hope that helps. All right. Awesome. Now, I think it is a bit better because I did hear myself a bit. So there's obviously a lot to discuss, and before I ask Rick to share some of his experience from the past and currently, and also to Andy to some of the experiences he has with his current clients. The obvious question, obviously, it's a second edition book from Lead and Disrupt. So Charles, why did you and Michael decide to write an update, right? What has changed?
Yeah. So thanks, Davy. Let me share some slides, and I'll describe a little bit about why we did that. Let me make sure that this works. Are you getting the? Whoops. Are you? No, that's not working. All right. Let me try this one more time here. So share PDF, and it doesn't let me do that. So let me try this. Oh, all right. So we're going to have to do it without the slides, I guess.
That's all right. I'll get it shared. Oh, there we go.
Yeah. There you go. Go to the second one, Andy. The next one.
Next one.
Next one. Yeah. So why a second edition? So after Mike and I wrote the first edition of Lead and Disrupt, we spent a lot of time out talking to leaders and companies around their issues with innovation. And we were in Japan, for instance, and we're talking to a big Japanese electronics company whose name you would all recognize. And they were very proud of the fact that they had spent a lot of effort with design thinking over a 3 or 4 year period. And they very proudly announced that they had generated 400 ideas for new products and new services. And I asked them, I said, well, how many of those have you actually been able to scale? And they said 2, and not very successfully. Andy and I were in Germany with a big German automobile manufacturer that you would recognize, and they had actually done a very nice job of ideation, of generating new ideas, and they actually were quite good at incubation. They had locations in Berlin and Munich, but they had failed completely to scale. And so that led us to realize that what we were missing from the original book was this notion about how do you really scale an innovation. So if you look at the slide, innovation really comes from creativity and implementation. It requires both. Next slide, Andy. And so what we realized was that there are really 3 separate disciplines that are required if you're going to successfully innovate within an organization. You have to have a process to generate ideas, ideation. And there are great processes to do that. Design thinking, open innovation, corporate venture capital. There are lots of ways of generating new ideas, but that's not sufficient. If you're going to be successful, you also have to have a discipline to figure out of all the ideas generated, which are the ones that are likely to be profitable and grow into big businesses. And again, we have methodologies to do that, Lean Startup, Business Canvas. But the real issue, I think, in many organizations is how do you actually scale them? How do you make sure that you have a discipline that gets the resources, the capabilities to the new business to grow them? Next slide, Andy. So if you think about it, design thinking is great at figuring out what customers want. The Lean Startup is a great methodology for figuring out whether it's both technically feasible and viable. But ambidexterity is really about scaling. Next slide. And so if you're interested, Andy and I wrote an article. Happy to send that article to you. It's also covered in the book. Next slide. Next slide, Andy. So the second edition of Lead and Disrupt really does a couple things different from the first book, Winning Through Innovation, was really described the problem. Why is it that big companies sometimes have trouble innovating? The Lead and Disrupt really talks about kind of what to do about it. And the next book, which will be out, is really about how to do it. Next slide. So let's take just a couple quick minutes and sort of set the context here. Next slide. So, I think most of us know, if you look at this slide, this list of industries, every one of these industries is being disrupted. And it's not just by technology, it's by business models and shifts in consumer preferences and new competitors and changes in regulation. Every one of these is being disrupted. And the reason this is happening is because the pace of change is actually increasing. At one level, that's a cliche, but it turns out the penetration of new technologies is just happening faster than it ever has in historically. And in the face of that, what we're seeing are great companies failing. That is, there's a study done that estimates between 2015 and 2025, half the firms in the Standard & Poor's 500 will be replaced. So think about what that means. That means that great companies, iconic companies, are either becoming irrelevant or in some cases being acquired and losing control of their destiny, or in some cases actually going bankrupt. And so as we looked at a whole raft of firms that had gone bankrupt, there was an interesting finding that we came to. that the reason these firms went bankrupt was not technology. They all either had or could have the technology. They really failed because they had leaders that couldn't play two games at the same time. And that's what the book really covers. It really has four big themes. The first theme is how do you execute strategy? You know, it doesn't do you any good to come up with a brilliant strategy if you can't execute it. And so we have a way of thinking about linking strategy to execution. The second big theme in the book, which is highlighted in the second edition, is this issue of culture. You know, everybody understands that culture is potentially important. But if you ask people, well, how are you going to manage it? How are you going to align it with strategy? Then people often get pretty vague. So culture can be a competitive advantage. It can be a real competitive disadvantage. So one of the things we do in the second edition is we talk in great length about how to think about aligning culture with strategy and how to make it a competitive advantage rather than a disadvantage. The third big theme in the book is this notion of ambidexterity. That is, how do you compete in today's businesses, mature businesses where you make money? But then how do you also come up with explore businesses, new businesses? And how do you do this in a world where the pace of change is increasing? So that's the problem. The solution to the problem is this notion of alignment. You know, I sometimes joke that I can teach 2 MBA courses in one slide, and this is the slide. And basically, what this slide says, which is what we cover in strategy course and the management course, is, you know, we set a strategy. The strategy determines what our key success factors or OKRs or, you know, are, what we have to do to execute the strategy. And then execution is about aligning the organization against those key success factors. So it's making sure you get the right people with the right skills, you're measuring and rewarding the right things, you're organized in a way that people can get the right information. And by the way, making sure that people share a set of expectations about how they need to behave to execute this strategy. So there's a lot of research that basically shows that fit leads to performance. You know, and there are a bunch of these models out there, the McKinsey 7S, some of you are familiar with. Fit really does lead to performance, and culture is a key ingredient in the execution of strategy. So here's the problem. The problem is, if alignment is important, and it is, and if culture is important, why then do we see all these failures? Well, it's actually conceptually pretty straightforward. Here's what happens. We set up an organization. We're successful. Because we're successful, we get bigger. Customers like it. We put in systems and processes, not because we like bureaucracy, but because that's where the learning is embedded. That's how we get more efficient. We do a better job with our customers. That builds in a certain structural inertia. If we're successful, we get larger and we develop cultures that support our success. Now we have a problem, because the very things that are making us successful in the mature business are putting us at risk. We've got inertia in our systems and processes. We've got inertia potentially in our culture and capabilities. And we've got inertia, if we're not careful, in how we as leaders see the world. So fit leads to performance, but performance leads to inertia. So what's the solution to that? Again, conceptually, the solution is pretty obvious. Different strategies require different alignments. That is, the alignment that it takes to compete in a big mature business is really different from the alignment that it takes to compete in an emerging business. So what that means is, especially in larger companies, we as leaders need to think about running potentially at least 3 very different types of businesses. We've got a core business with a particular alignment. We ought to have some growth businesses that may or may not have the same alignment depending on the nature of growth. And in the face of change, we have to have some explore businesses, and they will have different alignments. So the challenge is, how do we make money today, compete in our core, but also leverage capabilities, assets and capabilities into new markets? And that's what ambidexterity is about. It's about doing both of those things at the same time. Again, conceptually easy, but as I'm sure Rick will talk about, quite difficult to do in practice. So here's what we think is at least one way to think about solving this. It's this notion of thinking about having three very separate disciplines: a process, a discipline to generate new ideas, a discipline to figure out which of those ideas might be profitable, and then a separate discipline to actually scale those ideas. And in the book, we talk about a large number of organizations, including Walmart, by the way, that have been very good at doing this. So Amazon is a remarkable company. They've gone in 26 years from 0 revenues and 0 employees to $380 billion and 1.5 million employees. And if you get inside Amazon and you look at how they've done that, what you see is they have a discipline around ideation, a very particular way of generating ideas, a discipline around incubation, how do you test those ideas, and then a discipline about scaling. We've spent some time recently in the last couple of years with Intel. Some of you know that Intel is under existential threat. Their main core businesses are being undermined. They've set up a process, again, separate process for ideation, incubation, and scaling. Andy worked for a number of years for Lou Gerstner at IBM. When we were at IBM, they had a very robust process for generating new businesses that actually generated $15 billion in new businesses. Again, ideation, incubation, and scaling. What this really is doing is it's taking conceptually, it's taking the venture capital model, which is look for screen a bunch of ideas, vet a few of them, and then scale them. It's actually taking that and putting them inside the organization. And that's what the second edition does. These are companies that we talk about in the second edition of Lead and Disrupt. They're around the world, they're across different industries, but the commonality is that they all are able to be ambidextrous using this notion of ideation, incubation, and scaling. And the 5 things that I think it really takes to do this, and I'll stop on this slide, are you've got to have a senior team that really has a clear strategy to do this and has shared goals and incentives. And then they have to have an overarching vision and values that legitimate doing this. But by the way, different cultures within the explore and exploit units, and then a separate architecture for the explore units, but a process to make sure that these new businesses get the assets and capabilities they need. And by the way, finally, leaders that are willing to actually stick with this process. So let me, Andy, if you'll stop sharing, that's the high level overview of this.
Thank you, Charles. That was very insightful. And before we go on, I do want to welcome Isaac. Thank you for joining us and also introduce you. So Isaac is Director of McDonald's and Chief Inclusion Officer at Bama Companies. For those who don't know Bama Companies, they are a big, enormous global player. They deliver all the pies for McDonald's. And I believe, Isaac, that the fried pie is a family recipe. And I'm also told, and pretty good informed, that you like to share those. So feel free to ship one to Belgium. I'll happily taste it. I'm pretty good at pie eating as well. But no, glad that you could join us. So having now sort of seen the overview and learned about the ambidextrous organization, and it's a concept that here at Wazoku we talk about a lot with our customers. Rick, Charles called you out a few times and referred to Walmart. Is there anything that you can share on your experience that you've seen at Walmart and how that was approached over there?
Get unmuted here. I think I've had the fortune to, over the last 40 years, to work for most of the big retailers. Joined Walmart late in my career and had a retail consulting firm working with most of Walmart's major competitors and people on that slide, Charles, that aren't around anymore out there in the retail world. So the things that I'd like to use Walmart maybe as an example for today, I think apply across any big retailer, probably any big organization, but my area of familiarity will be with retailers. I think that Charles, a great book. I'd love to get a copy myself. It's as well stated in those slides as I've seen anybody talk through the subject out here. Walmart has gone through stages of innovation. I was the first engineer outside of logistics to get hired by Walmart now 17, 18 years ago. And I could remember the conversation with in my interview process trying to, what are we going to do with an engineer? And I think they've learned a lot about the combination of technology and process and innovation, practical innovation that's out there. Near the end of my career, new CEO came in and had a big conversation with us, Charles, about 10% of you in the audience, of all the officers, are going to be working on what's new. And the other 90% of you are going to run the day-to-day business, what's now, which conceptually made some sense kind of to where you were talking about this assignments that are made. It is a change management opportunity that I observed because those that were working on new kind of had the cool jobs. Those that were working on now were seen as having kind of mundane jobs, and frankly got worried about their livelihood at the company. That they were just going to work on maintaining a $500 million business, a $1 billion business at the time. So I think separation is really important, but how you orchestrate that, how you incent the people on both sides of that is truly important. Late in my career, Charles and Andy, I made a proposal to my boss to create what is now or was Store 8, a separate organization that would provide innovative ideas through partnerships outside the company with mature, qualified startups and some venture capital groups, and try to embed those into the company at the right time. So how do you get almost separated with a loose affiliation so you have that independence, but also have the resources available at a company like Walmart or Target or Home Depot, any of these big ones that have tried to do that. I was too early for that, given what was going on at Walmart, and they eventually, about 2 years after I left Walmart, started Store 8. And I think Store 8 probably went to the extreme. My friends who are involved in that is they got too separated from the business and lost touch of the customer and who had ownership and this whole definition of what are we trying to solve and for whom. It became almost competitive. And so there is that balance that I think you're describing well in the slides of how do you need both, but how do you maintain those that are out there? And maybe one more thing, and then we can I have a page full of ideas here around that, just as Charles was talking. But this commitment level, one of the things as a Walmarter watching Amazon, Walmart under the last 15, 20 years that I've been involved with it, is under constant pressure to increase earnings, drive sales. Comp sales is the thing that in my day you got graded on. You got incented on growing sales and maintaining profitability that was out there. We would come up as an innovation team with, I think, brilliant ideas, selfishly there, and start down a path to do the incubation, and then either a leadership change or pressures in the business or capital restrictions, we would lose momentum and some of the ideas, and they would just kind of find their way into the graveyard. The ongoing argument I have with some of my family members who are still very involved in the innovation group now, And my admiration of the Amazon group is in my friends there is once the senior leadership has made a commitment, they see the opportunity of an innovation, AWS, this crazy store where you don't check out now that they've been working on. It's a long-term commitment, and they make sure that they protect it. They allow it to incubate, and I think in the case of the sensor store, the Amazon Go that is beginning to move, it's an ongoing debate with my friends at Walmart is, will that ever work? And I'm saying you're asking the wrong question. These guys are learning from that technology, the application of that technology every day. They're starting to sell that technology as another line of business. And if you really understand the beginning of that, that was patented, I'm told, 7 or 8 years ago. So it's been a long road that company maintains. And I think any big retail company, again, in my familiarity, is under pressure to deliver comp sales, to make their supply chains work, to get ready for Christmas right now. And can get distracted. So that balance that you're describing, Charles, I think is really, really important. Is how do you manage this with really separate owners under an umbrella that fits the strategic requirements of the company, so you don't miss anything. So, excellent book. And I'll stop there. I can keep going, David, but those are important ones.
So Rick, can I make I'd like a little statement, but then I'd like to ask you and Isaac maybe a question, because and I don't know how you're going to answer my question, so it'll be kind of interesting. One of the things that we know that people on this webinar listening to us will be struggling with is, how do I get started? How do I move from kind of knowing effectively that Charles is right, that what you've described very articulately about Store 8, which I think is one of the sort of the stars in terms of the ability to get this kind of stuff rolling, and how do they make movement? What we've observed is that in the world there tends to be a corporate explorer, right? The person who's not an entrepreneur. These are not people who are starting up, they have equity in it and the rest of it. These are people who are going to start as a manager with an idea. And what we find is that every successful instance of what Charles was describing, of these ambidextrous transformations, they start with one of these individuals who is going to articulate an opportunity and somehow build a network of support around them, right? And then it gets picked up by a Rick Webb or an Isaac Rocha, and they make something into it inside the organization. A leader picks it up and runs with the ball, as it were. What do you think of that as a thesis? Is that your experience?
Yeah, I'll start, and Isaac, you follow. I totally agree that there's people out there that are seekers. I think the cultural opportunities that a company like my old company would be is everything from who gets credit for that idea, who manages it as a leader if it's a good idea. Do we have funding available for that? I think the thing, Andy, that we don't do at big companies enough is we don't spend as much time, in a kind of a classic SWOT, which my startups do a lot of because they're in that startup phase. But do corporate America spend enough time in that, looking out and understanding how the world is changing? If you've ever read Sam's kind of book that he's written, required reading for every Walmarter, one of his rules of business is steal shamelessly. And Sam would shop competition, right? He's looking for ideas constantly. One of my best friends at Walmart was brilliant. Davy, he was over in the UK, and he would take us on trips to Europe in the summertime. We spent a couple of weeks just going to different places, and he could see technology in a completely different industry and see the opportunity to bring it into a retail industry. So I think you're spot on, Andy, is how do you teach an organization to be more observant, better listeners, both to customers and to competition, so that they don't miss that. I mean, I love Clay Christensen. I love your complimentary book that you two have written to that. But it's easy to see how big companies running big businesses that are doing very well can quit looking around them and miss it, and then it sneaks up on them. It sneaks up on them too much. You're in trouble. I mean, I think today Walmart has made incredible advances in their e-commerce business over the last few years, but it's been a run up a tall hill to do that, and relatively, I think they're probably number 2 now relative to Amazon, but they're still not at the same size. Amazon continues to grow and distance themselves. So a miss, 10 or 12 years ago to go, oh, this is not a bookseller. This is a competitor with incredible opportunities. We didn't see it, like to your point.
Isaac, what's your thought about the role that people can take to actually make some of this stuff happen?
Yeah, I think when you're talking about disruption and innovation, to Charles' point, I think what's important is the culture of the company open to that, and how do they foster that disruption? So the diversity of thought that comes into a discussion on a team, is that something that is affirmed and wanted, or is that something that is frowned upon? And so, from a diversity standpoint, we know that diverse teams and diversity of thought will outperform homogenous teams. However, if the culture isn't correct, then they will actually underperform homogenous teams. So that really comes to things that we do at Bama, like Covey, those EQ skills, and then trying to get to innovation and understand what our customers want, which is a very Deming-focused principle. And so, for example, everyone knows our apple pies. We make about 4 million a day, and we make products into 33 countries. But we also listen to our customer, and one of the things that McDonald's focuses on is multicultural consumers and the Hispanic consumer. So for the Hispanic consumer, we have something guava, it's in Spanish, it's guayaba, but we have that, and it's one of our most best-selling promotional pies in the market. We have it in Miami, we have it in Southern California, and very high concentrations of Hispanic consumer markets. Mm-hmm. Now, when we brought guava to R&D, this is a very American white team. They had no idea what we were talking about, but we showed them the business case. This is what McDonald's wants with the Hispanic consumer. They're focusing on these markets, and guava is a product that the Hispanic consumer eats since I was a kid. We all ate guava. And so we were able to, that disruption wasn't something that we don't understand, so therefore R&D is not going to look at this product. It was, oh, we understand the business case, and then we're going to move forward with this product, and now it's one of our most successful promotional pies. So I think it comes to culture. How does that disruption sit within the culture, and is it something that's absorbed in a positive fashion?
Mm-hmm. I have a question on if you look at the sort of the separation of some of the functions, right, and sort of the horizons that you look at, but at the same time you're trying to build, and you mentioned that culture is super important. So how do you manage that part, right? Because like what Rick said, right, I can easily see that some people get alienated either way, right? You see a lot of spin-offs happening out of large organizations where people are part of an organization. They then create their own startup because they want to innovate and they don't feel that they can do that. And then you have people stuck in a job that maybe not be able to work on the new stuff and the mundane stuff, as you call it, Rick, and they feel, kind of treading water. So how is there any experience that any of you has around managing that culture and still helping the organization to operate as one team?
Yeah. So Rick put his finger on something important where he talked about the cool jobs versus the mundane jobs. One of the leaders that we spent some time with that was very good at this notion of ambidexterity described it in the following way. He said, I've got two kids. One is in high school, one has graduated from college. He said, I love them both. I talk to them in completely different ways because they need different things. And I never let one think that I love the other more. So back to your point, Rick, that if a company or a leader says, this is the cool thing, and by the way, the rest of you slugs are just generating money for it, that's the problem that you're putting your finger on, Davy. So part of it is a leadership issue and a framing issue. The second part is the cultural issue. So one of the things that strikes me when people talk about culture, they leave it pretty vague. And in the book, we're very clear that it's not something vague. It is the pattern of behavior that's reinforced by people and systems. That's what culture is. It's not values. It's the pattern of behavior. And then you have to ask yourself, what is the pattern of behavior that we need in this unit? And what is the pattern of behavior we need in another unit? So you can actually have very different cultures. Those cultures typically will have some norms, values that are constant. So teamwork, respect, inclusion, those cut across the organization. But others around innovation, sort of customer centricity, those will differ. Andy, you want to add to that at all?
Yeah, I mean, I want to pick up a little bit where Isaac was with this, because I think, where you were going was very much around the importance of the diversity of the workforce and sort of leveraging them as this extraordinarily wide pool of experience and ideas that exist in any organization. If you can tap all of that capability, then you have a better chance at the sort of the practical insights that can turn into new businesses. And there's a dimension to that we underplay, which is what you might call strategic diversity, right? Which is what Charles is talking about. How do you get it so that businesses at different stages of maturity are allowed to operate in a different way? And there's a question in the chat here about how do you manage in an environment that is under risk and compliance, and how do you operate in respect to all the regulation that exists, and have one that is able to operate with uncertainty and exploration and all of the things that are needed when you're dealing with any form of innovation, really. And the secret to this is this strategic diversity idea. Different types of rhythm of business depending on the needs of the business, and an appreciation that from all of us, that the people who run companies, CEOs, senior teams, they don't necessarily know how to make that work, right? They're not blessed with an insight of saying, I know how to be an explorer and an entrepreneur as well as an operational business manager. So one of the things that we all have to take on is a responsibility to teach them, right? How do you evaluate metrics and evidence of an exploratory business in a way that's different to a core operating business where it's more predictable and so on, so they can see the diversity and recognize that it has value and they can manage it, but just differently.
I like that, Andy. I had the opportunity the last 4 or 5 years of my career, like you, Isaac. I ran engineering teams in 14 different countries, and so had 600-700 people that were a part of the innovation team at the time. And the richness of that was if you could get them into forums where they could actually share their best practices, if you will, or what they're seeing in their markets. There was an incredible learning opportunity in that. I think the opportunity for being primarily US based at the time was not understanding the context in that country for an idea that we would push. I'm guilty myself of trying to push a very good idea that runs really, really well in Dallas, Texas, into Sao Paulo, and not understanding the cultural differences, the infrastructure differences, the pay differences, all the things that make Sao Paulo unique. And then realizing about 6 months in that the Dallas idea was going to be an absolute failure. But until my lieutenants at the time, who were brilliant people, started to build relationships with their peer groups in Sao Paulo, that was the only way we got kind of out of this, let's force this down because we know what's best, into a partnership with a country on, okay, of this, how much of this can you take? How much do we need to modify that? So, but it frankly, I was guilty early on, I think, and I had all the ideas and I was clueless as to what was going on, the differences between, Beijing and Sao Paulo and the UK. They're such different environments. It took that team coming together and wanting to understand each other's businesses before we could really take advantage of this incredible library of great ideas.
On that note, so if we look at sort of the explore versus explode kind of approach, right? What are your thoughts around who do you include from potentially layers of the organization, functions of the organization in either activity, right? If you sort of start diversifying, because we've seen, for instance, from our own experience, that a great idea can come from anywhere, right? And often even from people where you least would expect it from. Even if we look at open innovation, for instance, we see that a majority of the ideas actually doesn't come from the experts in the field, but comes from somebody who has some notions of that particular domain, but then has other expertise that they can bring to the problem, and all of a sudden a new insight follows. So how do you manage that in sort of the ambidexterity that you're trying to drive in your organization?
So that's an issue of ideation, actually. And you can think about top-down innovation, and many organizations have units that are looking for mega trends and trying to identify where the world is going and then generate ideas. What you're suggesting, Davy, is, which is true, is can you have a bottom-up approach? We've seen successful organizations do both. Walmart, for instance, at Store 8, many of the ideas come from senior managers and others, but they also have a process to solicit ideas from bottom up. This is what Intel does. Intel gets ideas from their Intel fellows, from their senior managers, but they also have a process for bottom up. So you can do both. Andy?
I wanted to pick up a question that's in the chat because I thought it was really related to this, but it's also slightly different. So Tim Whitworth has asked about how do you gain alignment within a business that's really focused on business as usual when you're wanting to introduce an idea that is new and outside of that, right? More radical to this. And, this is a little bit of where we've gone with this corporate explorers notion, is that what Tim's asking, at some level, you look at it, well, you can't do that. You must have a senior team on board. You have to have a leadership team and an ambidextrous organization and a capital investment program for allocating for resources but maybe you don't, because it turns out that people have built billion-dollar businesses inside existing corporations, starting exactly as Tim has articulated. And what they do is they have a killer insight about the world. They see something that they're unhappy about, and they then explore that in enough depth. And yes, they're going to do it in their own time. They're going to find ways of maybe begging a little bit of additional latitude from their manager to do the exploration. But they really build the case. They are out there. If you go to LexisNexis, the legal information company, they were 20 years ago less than $1 billion of revenue. Today they have a business, LexisNexis Risk Analytics, which is well above $2 billion of revenue, completely separate from the existing business. And that all started with this guy Jim Peck, who saw the opportunity to leverage the assets of the firm to do something different, new, and revolutionary. And they made some acquisitions and they built it up over time. But I can give you 5, 6, 7 examples of people who do this. And it means having a clear insight about a really important customer problem, building a case around why that's got value to it, having some sort of idea about what you can do, something provocative, and then build support around it. Build a social network of allies and advocates around you, so that over time you start to move towards, let's do something about this. And it takes time, it takes patience. But let me tell you, being an entrepreneur trying to get venture capital to back your idea takes an awful lot of patience and an awful lot of knocking on doors as well. So this is no different. It's just, it's maybe not something we've focused on over the years.
Yeah. Isaac, is that something that you can share maybe on how you went from producing a super successful product, right, the pie, and then moved on to sort of this more extended category and now delivering bread products to some of the most well-known, food chains out there?
Yeah, I think for us, what we kind of lead into is consumer insights. And I think McDonald's is one of the best businesses that does consumer insights. I think they're looking at consumer insights and behaviors daily. And so if you look at McDonald's and what they did, they were the first partner with Uber Eats. Thank God they did that, because 70% of their business comes through the drive-through. But during COVID, what saved them and the reason they've had profitable, one of the most profitable years during COVID, is because of the innovation with Uber Eats. They were looking at that consumer behavior, how consumers were eating technology and how they were addressing that within the QSR field. For Bama, we're constantly looking at innovation and consumer insights to give us the roadmap as to what products we should innovate for our customers. And so we know that, for example, the guava pie, it's high with Hispanic consumers. We know that our strawberry and cream cheese pie is great with African American and Asian consumers. So we're constantly looking at consumer insights to be able to bring that innovation to our customers so that we're relevant. And that's what Deming says in his principles, being relevant to the customer.
All right. I want to address another question from the panel. I think we touched upon it a little bit, but still it would be interesting to maybe if we can dig a little deeper. This is a question from Ian. So for the scaling stage, how can you ensure that there's focus on a program rather than just a project?
So this is a distinction that Amazon makes. Amazon, if something is a project, it implicitly has a time frame attached to it. What Amazon does is they talk about programs. So back to Rick was talking about Amazon Go, the store that you can walk in and walk out. That's 10 years in the making. They developed they had no skill in the camera technology necessary to do the tracking, but they believed that was a revolutionary innovation. So they see things as programs rather than projects. So the short answer is it requires senior level commitment to not just say this is a 12-month or an 18-month project, but if it looks like it has legs, then we're gonna keep funding it. So project suggests to me finite time frame, and that can be problematic.
Yeah, it's interesting, Charles. If you've shopped at Walmart over the last 3 or 4 years, for a lot of reasons, the checkout area of Walmart's have come under constant change. Maybe not so much in Boston and up in California, but you have stores that have no cashiers. You have stores that have a particular type of self-checkouts. You've got stores where you walk in with your phone and scan and go. It's been an interesting as a consumer, as a customer here, to try to figure out where are you all going with this, and are you, Isaac, seeking real feedback from the customers at different demographic clusters around the country for what it is that you're building? Are you doing this because you need the P&L support, or it's really, really hard for the last couple of years to find 300,000 cashiers to be in our stores? Or are you doing it because you think that the big slice of your demographics that are shopping you want to use self-checkout? And it's a constant conversation within my family, because that used to be one of my areas, is what's the basis for the change? What's the direction? Is it going to be a one solution fits all, which is often the way it runs? Or are you going to be thoughtful enough to cluster it based upon specific customer needs in that area? And it's hard. It's a lot easier to say, you know what, we're going to put in 80% of all the lanes are going to be self-checkouts in every store. And you go, well, that just messed up a whole bunch of people that are my age. And, frankly, I have a need for a self-checkout sometimes, and then I like having a cashier sometimes. So help me understand that. So it really is an intelligence level of how do you take that information and make the application that's strategic. So Andy, I think you're right.
Here's what I hear in that program project distinction, which is that a program attaches to an ambition. Amazon are going to do this reinvention of the store, and they're going to figure it out. But the projects are all those little experiments that they're going to take together. And to your point, if you only did the experiment, you didn't have the intention, then you just kind of play, it doesn't work, or we'll give up. Yeah. And that's what makes the difference. It's attached to something. You're going to keep at it. You're going to keep trying to find your way towards this new way of doing things.
Yeah, it feels like Amazon is running down a spot where they want their store experiences to be as easy as their online experiences, right?
Yeah, absolutely.
And you can see them go in that direction. And I get confused at my stores down the street here on where are you guys going with this?
They're doing projects.
Yeah, it is. Exactly. I suspect there's this long-term strategy, but my friends who are doing the projects cannot connect to that strategy to know where they're going. And so they're project managers. They're not, they feel disconnected with, okay, where's this going to play out? So I think the program project is really a brilliant thought.
The last question I have, and then we're probably up for time, but one of the things I was also wondering, are there certain topics in areas that potentially almost, I'm going to calling it crossing the chasm now, where you may start in an exploit situation, but suddenly getting to an explore type activity? And I'll give one example, for instance, sustainability, right? So we're talking to some manufacturing companies, they're delivering to automotive industry. The difference from a combustion engine car, which has 20,000 to 70,000 parts, to an electric car, which has a lot less parts. If you're the one manufacturing the parts that are getting scrapped, it becomes, it started maybe as sustainability, but now all of a sudden it becomes a battle for survival, right? So how does that fit into the whole model? And are there any other approaches that you got to think about, as some things that may cross both sides?
And particularly, like you're thinking the core, this core explore distinction that we make, and don't tell Charles I said this, but at some level this doesn't exist in the real world, right? This is just a construct that we make to set up the difference. There's lots of things in between. There are lots of cases when you really deal with a business. There are lots of different variations of this, and our problem is it's really understanding when something that looks very incremental, very unthreatening, actually turns out to be something you're going to resist, right? Even though it's logical and there's a strong business case attached to it. And so that's really what you've got to watch out for, is when do you need to make that shift from ideation into incubation? Go ahead, Charles.
So we've spent some time with General Motors, and there is core and explore. The core is internal combustion engine. The explore are electric vehicles. And if you try to put them together, the internal, as we saw with this unnamed car company in Germany, where they were run by internal combustion engines, they had some great opportunities that they were never going to realize. GM, on the other hand, has a core business. They're going to make as much money for as long as they can, but they have the explore business, which is at some point going to replace the core business. So I'll Andy and I will get this sorted out later.
All All right. I think we're sort of up on our time. Now, first of all, gentlemen, thank you so much for your time and joining us today. I realize you all are extremely busy, so appreciating getting this hour in your diary. Charles, congrats again on the book.
Thank you.
For those who don't have a copy, I'll get some exciting news to you now in a minute. And obviously, we look forward to reading about the corporate explorers, because the more I hear about this, the more I think they are important. And
Available to pre-order now on Amazon.
Yeah,
awesome. And I can see some similarities in some sales concepts that we have. We call them champions, right? And I think there's a lot of similarities there, and people trying to move the needle. So very interesting. Like I said, so for the people in the audience, here at Wazoku, we would love to talk about your innovation program, your strategy, and more importantly, some of the challenges you have to successfully deploy innovation at scale. So after this webinar, actually you see it already on the screen here, you'll be guided to a page. If you leave your details behind and you're ready to spend 30 minutes with us talking about your innovation program and strategy and some of the challenges you face, then we will ship you a free copy of Lead and Disrupt. And then you can enjoy more details and learn a lot more about what we discussed today. Again, all of you, thank you for your time. For those that want to learn even more about what we do, we have another interesting webinar coming up next week. It will be one of our customers, Multiconsult, but basically it's about how consulting engineers and designers are embracing innovation at scale to help prepare their business to meet the challenges of business today and for the future. I think that is a lot of the concepts that we talked about today. So we'll see some more of that in practice. So thank you so much all for joining. I wish you a pleasant day.
Nice to meet you all. Congratulations on the book. It's wonderful.
Thank you, Rick. Thank you, Isaac.
Y'all take care. Bye.
Bye.